Okay. Hey, guess what? Guess what's back? Guess what's back, everybody? Anybody want to guess? How about in the back there? Mike, Debbie, anybody want to guess what's coming back?
No idea. What's coming back?
How about you guys in the back? 6 questions? Got a guess?
The show?
No. The show is back. What's coming back in February? Anybody have a guess?
Taco trivia.
Tacos and trivia at the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Saturday, February 15th. Bring your loving sweetheart out, 6 o'clock to 8:30 p.m. Join us for another lighthearted evening of family-friendly general trivia, but not about generals. Oh, for prizes, a taco bar will be provided by the Ragged Edge Catering. This evening is BYOB. The water, lemonade, and iced tea will be included, so bring your own booze. Registration is individual, but you may register up to 6 total people, which would be a full team at one time. Listen, last year we did this. Let's see, who was there? Mike was there. Debbie was there, right?
Yep.
Not Mikey B, though. Mikey B wasn't there. You're going to be there this time, Mikey, right?
Very possibly, maybe.
I think you should. You'll have fun. It was a lot of fun. Debbie was there. I'm sorry. Bethany was there. Cindy was there. Colby and Taylor were there. Veronica was there. Who else was there? Kath was there with Veronica. Trivia. What's that?
We were robbed.
We were robbed of a victory.
Yeah.
Because Taylor, I think it was Taylor, right? She, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, it was Taylor's fault. Okay, so what? It wasn't Taylor's fault?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, Taylor was right.
Taylor was right.
And
it was Colby's fault.
Wrong.
No, we were right. You
information.
go by the questions.
From
it's our
the 1985 version of Trivial Pursuit.
So what you have to do is you've got to go to the Seminary Ridge Museum's website, which is seminaryridgemuseum.com. And sign up there. You could also call 717-339-1300 or email them info@seminaryridgemuseum.com. Listen, honestly, folks, it's a lot of fun. We have a great time. Bring whatever booze you want. Have fun with it. Enjoy yourself, because we're going to do the same thing. And let's see who wins. May the best team win. We'll see you in February. Don't forget, February 15th, tacos, trivia, and love.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask A Gettysburg Guide number 15, Bob.
Wow, Matt.
Unbelievable.
15 times we've been this stupid to be this cold sitting out there. Here it is, May, 15th today?
Yeah.
And we're still freezing, Matt.
Yeah, and we chose today because the forecast was saying it was going to be up in the 70s, and this morning it was nice, and I go, oh, this is great. We finally have a break with the weather, and then literally, I said this to Roy, like a half hour before we started, when we're setting up here, the clouds come rolling in.
Yes.
And now it's cold and windy, and I have shorts on, and so does Eric, and we're freezing.
Yes.
We're going to get hypothermia. Anyway, today we're talking to you from East Cemetery Hill. Right behind the Howard statue, there's a big old craggly tree, and we're sitting underneath it. And we're going to be talking about the National Cemetery. And so we brought in the expertise of Roy Frampton. Hello, Roy. How are you?
Cold.
Yeah, well.
But hanging in there.
Good. Well, thank you for doing this. Roy, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been guiding?
Well, I guess I'm the old timer. I started 1968.
Oh, geez.
2 weeks out of high school.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So this, if I even get any tours in this year, it'll be 52 years.
Wow. And what was the guide exam like back then? What'd you have to do?
Not as complicated as it is today. You would take the written examination. We took it that time at night. And then after about, a month or so, then they called me up for the oral examination. Okay. That was it.
Okay, which is that's basically the way it was until only a few years ago, right?
Correct. Right.
Okay. All right, and also we have Tim Smith with us. Hello, Tim. How are you?
Hello.
And we're going to get into questions that the audience sent in about the National Cemetery. So let's get started. Veronica Bristensky says, I'd like to know the story behind the USCT graves there. How many are buried there? How did the burials come about? My understanding is that they were not initially welcomed or included. Is that right? Are they just local men? That kind of info, please. So, Roy, what do we know about the USCT? First of all, USCT stands for United States Colored Troops, so that's what she's talking about there. And go ahead.
Yeah, she mentions, well, first of all, there's a fallacy that the National Cemetery was never segregated. There was no policy of segregating, not allowing blacks, African Americans to be buried in the National Cemetery. So that rumor that has spread around, that's totally false.
So you're saying the fallacy was that it was segregated?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was never segregated.
Never segregated.
Gotcha.
Never was. And I got a list. Hey, I did my research.
Good.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 African Americans that are buried basically in the Civil War section.
Okay.
You want me to go through them?
Sure.
Oh, okay. The first one is Henry Gooden, and he's in the 127th U.S. Colored Troops. He is a Pennsylvanian, didn't see any action in the war. He spent most of his service down in Texas, I think herding cows. I think that's what he was doing.
Okay.
But he lived in Carlisle. He died in 1876. And then he was reburied here in the Gettysburg National Cemetery in November of 1884.
Okay.
So he's the first African American buried in the National Cemetery. And yeah, he is a Civil War veteran. But that's 1884.
Okay.
Then you have Clifford Henderson, Emmett Martin, and Nicholas Farrell. Those three African Americans are buried in the Ohio section. They are not Civil War. They're Spanish American. All three of them belong to the 9th Ohio Battalion, and all three died in Camp Meade, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, of disease.
So why are they in Ohio?
They were from Ohio.
Okay. Gotcha.
Right. So they were originally from Ohio. They enlisted at the beginning of the Spanish-American War. Their unit, the 9th Battalion, was stationed in Harrisburg, and not quite sure what illness got them, probably typhoid. But all three of them died. Henderson died in September 1898. Martin died November 1898. And Farrell died also in November of 1898.
I guess really my question is, if they're a Spanish-American War, why are they in the Civil War section?
That's a question I really can't answer.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to stump you.
At that time, 1898, the semicircle, which is the Civil War, is really basically the only place where they were burying dead.
Okay.
There are a few just outside the circle. But in 1898, they're basically still burying people within the semicircle.
And those are not the only Spanish-American War burials within the semicircle.
Correct. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 more of them. And one of those is Harry Prager, 2nd Tennessee, which is also a black unit.
Okay.
And he's also Spanish-American. In fact, he contracted yellow fever in Cuba. And they shipped him up here to Harrisburg, and he died also in Harrisburg at Camp Meade.
Huh. All right.
So there are several blacks in the National Cemetery. It was never segregated. The last one that is Civil War related is Charles Parker. He's buried outside the semicircle. And he was from New York, died in 1876. But then his body was transferred to the National Cemetery in 1936.
Okay. So I guess really, I should have asked you this first here. The National Cemetery itself.
Yep.
Let's get into a little background on how that came into existence.
Okay.
So the battle occurs, then what?
Okay, take yourself back to 1863 in July. And you lived here. Bodies are everywhere. You can't walk anywhere. You know, there's bodies sticking up out of the ground, temporarily buried. You got to find a place to put the dead. So I'm going to ask Tim, who's the father of the Gettysburg National Cemetery?
Well, I guess we would say David Wills.
Correct. But who comes up with the idea?
Well, the idea for the cemetery actually started even before the battle. David McConaughey, who was the president of the Evergreen Cemetery in 1862, actually proposed a plan whereby the Cemetery Association buy a separate piece of land near the Evergreen Cemetery or next to it and established a cemetery for soldiers from Adams County that had been killed during the war. And that plan sort of resurfaced immediately after the battle.
And on July 23rd, they had a meeting up at David Wills' house on the square. And a man by the name of Theodore Diamond is actually the man that proposed establishing a separate burial plot space for all the dead of the Union Army. So it's Theodore Diamond also that, now he was a contractor from New York and Massachusetts. He was sent down here to Gettysburg to find a burial place predominantly for Massachusetts soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where the cemetery idea comes from. And of course, as I said earlier, we're sitting here on East Cemetery Hill. This is where the cemetery was supposed to be. At least this is where David Wills wanted the cemetery to be established. But it's McConaughey that threw a monkey wrench into everything, buying up the land and writing the governor of the state. And it took a while, but finally the 18 northern states involved in the establishment of the cemetery and the governor of the state put the pressure on, and the townspeople put the pressure on McConaughey, and they bought the land on the western side then of the Baltimore Pike.
And what was that before it became the cemetery? Was it just farmland, or?
It's farmland. I believe it was a cornfield, part of an orchard.
Okay.
And of course, keep in mind, it's part of the battlefield.
Well, yeah.
There are artillery positions on the top of the hill that is now, of course, today the cemetery.
Right, okay. All right, so now we'll move on here to the great Trinetti. He's back from a short hiatus from the show, and he wants to know how many batteries were positioned on Cemetery Hill, and how does the creation of the Soldiers Cemetery how has the creation of the Soldiers Cemetery affected the memorialization of those batteries?
Okay, let's see. Let's count the batteries. One in New Hampshire.
I think it would depend upon what time in the battle we're talking about, because
Right.
at different points, units were moved in and out. But let's say we have Hall's Battery, Huntington's Battery, Edgell's Battery. I'm forgetting one up there, the U.S. regular one near the fence. Taft's Battery, part of Taft's Battery, New York Artillery, was in Evergreen Cemetery, and part of it was in what is now the National Cemetery. I think the bigger question he might be asking here, Roy, and I don't know how much thought I put into this. The National Cemetery is landscaped at such an early date, we don't really know exactly what it looked like between the time of the battle and the landscaping of the cemetery itself. Do you believe, I guess I'm going to ask this question for him, do you believe there were lunettes in the cemetery just as there are on East Cemetery Hill today?
I think there probably was.
And those lunettes were probably destroyed when he built the cemetery. You know, one of the, to get to the gist of the answer to his question is that, and we mentioned McConaughey and Wills, there are two competing views for how the battlefield should be preserved. The National Cemetery is a beautiful place where there are trees and roadways, and we cut the grass nice and neatly, and that might be Wills' interpretation of how the battlefield park should be as it comes comes to be. They don't have this right away. And then, of course, we have East Cemetery Hill, which has the original lunettes from the battle and the stone walls that were here during the fighting. And it's kind of preserved the way it was at the time of the battle. So in the haste to beautify Cemetery Hill and eventually plant trees on it, you know, it's kind of destroyed the reason that Cemetery Hill was important during the battle, because it was a big open hill that dominated all the land around it. So the preservation of the cemetery and the establishment of the cemetery itself was a problem with, you know, trying to keep the battlefield looking the way it did at the time of the battle.
Yeah.
And not every battery that was there has a set of cannons near them either, right?
That's true.
Like Dilger's battery, their cannons are out there on the first day on Howard, but they were also here on the rest of the battle, and I think they might have a flank marker or something here, but I don't think there's guns for marking Dilger.
Yeah, I think there are. I think
there are?
two
Yeah,
guns
they're
over there.
the two right over there, aren't they?
Yes.
And there's a little monument that's in the shape of a cannon, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that?
That's
Dilger?
Taft.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
Taft.
that's not Dilger. Okay.
Oh, excuse
All right.
me.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you guys are here.
All right. So Darth Etzcorn wants to know, in the annex of the National Cemetery, there is a line of evergreen trees along the fence by the coffee shop. Okay. Is there any shred of truth to the rumor that under the tree in the corner closest to Steinway is a mass Confederate grave?
I have, honestly, in all the 52 years, I've never heard that.
That sounds like something you would hear on a ghost tour.
Obviously, that's a ghost tour. And the reason that they tell stories like that is because the ghost tours are not allowed to walk into the cemetery onto park property. So they need to move stories closer to places like the parking lot of the coffee shop.
Yeah. You know, I actually I had family come and visit. My cousin brought her kids, and her one son was really into the ghost stuff, and they wanted to do a ghost tour. And I said, all right, have fun. I'll see you afterwards. And they said, no, you got to come with us. So I went along, and we went to, I won't give too many details because I don't want to bash the company, but we went to this one area near Tommy's Pizza, and the person claimed that the reason that particular area was very haunted was because there was a mass Confederate grave there. And so as we were walking to the next stop, I went on my phone and I pulled up the Elliott map. And I showed her son. I said, look, this is where we just were. Do you see any graves? And my cousin yelled at me for ruining his I said, I'm trying to teach the kid history and you're yelling at me. But, you know, this is the world we live in. But okay, so that sounds like a ghost tour story is the consensus here, and that's terrible. Okay. Joe Denise asks, how much of the story is true about the reveling in town the night before the dedication ceremony in November 1863?
I would say there was quite a bit. The town was packed.
Were people camping out here?
Huh? What?
Weren't people camping out here or something? Like
There's
people camped all over the place?
In the churches, sleeping in pews.
Can you imagine?
How many bars is in the town of Gettysburg?
Well, I mean, depending on how you count taverns, hotels, there's like 8 or 9. But, you know, all the public buildings apparently had people sleeping in them. All the churches were open and people sleeping in the pews. Here, keep this in mind. It's almost like, you know, the battle. We have, according to the low figure, there are 10 or 15,000 people in town for the address, and the high figure reaches, you know, I think the Chicago Tribune says there's 50,000. I don't see it being that many, but there are not enough places for people to sleep. And so a lot of people just decide, since there's no place to sleep, just to stay awake all night. And there's lots, you know, even according to some of the dignitaries that are at the ceremony, there's a lot of parties that are available to attend that night. There's a lot of carousing.
Interesting.
Yeah, because Lincoln's 2 private secretaries, Nicolay and Hay, they stayed up most of the night going from tavern to tavern to tavern.
Oh, really?
And from party to party to public speaking. So the town was, it was jumping.
Did I read somewhere that everybody was awakened by cannon fire in the morning from right here?
Yep.
Yeah.
From here on top of Cemetery Hill, there's at least a battery of guns that are going to fire a salute in the morning.
Salute, right. And so that wakes up the whole town, and then ceremonies for the day begin? What time did the Gettysburg Address occur? Was that?
That's a hard question to come by, too.
Well,
First
roughly.
of all, the parade, which I think was supposed to start around 10 in the morning, it's late getting started. And so the estimation is that Lincoln probably delivered the Gettysburg Address sometime in the early afternoon. I've heard people say 2 o'clock, maybe before that. It's hard to pinpoint exactly the time.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have to depend on how long Edward Everett spoke and what time they reached the cemetery and how
True.
long the prayer that thought itself a speech took place and things like that. Remember, there's all kinds of things.
Are you knocking Reverend Stockton, chaplain of the Senate, who gave a oration, a prayer that was almost longer than, well, definitely it was longer than the Gettysburg Address. Yeah.
Not longer than Everett, thankfully.
Yeah. Tim Smith's picking on us ministers, and I'm a minister, I'll tell you.
All right.
I agree with you, Tim. No prayers should be long drawn out. They should not be. But his was.
Brian Derenick emailed us and said, "Hi, Matt. I have a question for your Ask a Guide National Cemetery episode. 1, can you speak to how the 9 Confederate soldiers were accidentally buried in the National Cemetery and ended up in the individual state burial sections their remains are located in today? How were these soldiers later identified as the mistaken?"
Okay, well, I guess you're looking at the guy who found not all of them, but most of them.
Well, look at this.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start with the first one that I discovered. So when I started researching the cemetery, what I did, I took all the names of all the people we have in the cemetery, those that are known, and I checked them with regimental rosters.
Okay.
So name after name, I would make sure, okay, the name is connected to this regiment and that regiment. I got to one man by the name of E.T. Green, and he's buried in the Pennsylvania section, I believe 14th Pennsylvania Regiment, it says on the stone. There's a problem right away. There's no 14th Pennsylvania Regiment on the battlefield.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, they must have made a mistake. Must be the 14th Brooklyn. So I looked at the 14th Brooklyn's roster. No E.T. Green. Went through all the Pennsylvania listing. Nobody by that name even listed in Pennsylvania. So by chance, I just randomly said, oh, well, let's try Virginia. Let's try 14th Virginia. Boom. His name appeared in the roster. Eli T. Green from Mecklenburg, Virginia. He's Armistead's brigade.
Okay.
So he's the first one that I discovered. Now, Kathy George Harrison, who used to be chief historian, she had already discovered John Johnston, and he's buried in the Mississippi plot. I mean, the Massachusetts plot, but he is from Mississippi. Okay. So the 9 Confederates that we have, I hate to use this word, unearthed.
Oh,
man,
I like
okay.
it, Roy.
The 9 Confederates that we've discovered, every one of them probably they got buried there because of the similarity of the abbreviations of the states that they came from and the similarity of the abbreviation of the state that they're buried in right now. E.T. Green is from Virginia. What's the abbreviation for Virginia?
VA.
VA. And he's buried in the Pennsylvania plot.
PA.
We have 2 Georgia boys buried also in the Pennsylvania plot. GAPA.
Okay.
We have a Marylander, Southerner, buried in the Maryland plot. Oh, that's easy. Maryland and Maryland. And he was hit over in Corpse Hill, fighting against Maryland troops. We have 2 Carolina boys, Sidney Carter, who we know quite a bit about, Lieutenant Sidney Carter. He's in the 13th South Carolina. And David Williams, who's buried also in the Connecticut plot. He's in the 14th North Carolina, I believe. No, 20th North Carolina. Again, they're from Carolina, and they're buried in the Connecticut plot. So you got C and C.
Okay.
And then you have 2 Mississippi boys, Johnson and this one guy, B.N. Hyman, They're both from Mississippi, and they're buried in the Massachusetts plot. And for all these years, I've been trying to find out what the first name of B.N. Hyman was. And actually, just a few months, I found out. Napoleon Bonaparte Hyman.
Bonaparte. Wait, is it BN or NB?
No, it's NB. Sorry,
NB. Oh, okay.
Hey, I'm old. I get things switched around here.
Okay.
Right. So his first name is Napoleon. Middle name is Bonaparte Hyman. But again, Mississippi, buried in the Massachusetts plot. So those are the 8. But there's a ninth
9.
one.
Yeah.
And that's James Ackers. He's also Mississippi, but he's buried in the Pennsylvania plot. And he's the only one that I really can't explain.
Huh.
The other ones are easy, the abbreviations, but why James Acker is buried there, don't know.
What regiment was Ackers?
2nd Mississippi, Davis's brigade.
And just as a aside here for the people who may not understand, after the Battle of Gettysburg, people were buried on the field, even Confederates buried by their comrades. And, you know, there were wooden headboards and the names were written in with pencil.
Right.
We can see this specifically in one of the photographs that was taken near the Rose Farm that shows dead in their graves, not covered with headboards. And if you go to the Library of Congress and download one of them, you can actually read the pencil written on the headboard. So we're talking about months after the battle, someone trying to read the pencil inscription on a headboard, and they made a few mistakes. And that mistake just doesn't just end with Confederates being buried in the cemetery. There are many people whose names are totally wrong or misspelled, and there are many people that are given the wrong regiments in the cemetery.
And sometimes you will see on the stones, correct, gentlemen, it's been crossed out. It's been scraped out. And sometimes another name like Darius or Darius Coyle.
Right. Right.
You got some stories about that kind of stuff?
Well, let me finish up. A couple of the Confederates, like E.T. Green from Virginia, Armistead's Brigade, and Hyman, they were wounded, brought into the Union lines, and they were taken to Camp Letterman. Those 2 men died at Camp Letterman. They were buried in Camp Letterman's cemetery. And again, as Tim said, the headboard is written probably in pencil, E.T. Green, 14th VA, but after months and months, you can't read it. And so,
you can make out an A, and so you figure it's yeah.
Correct. But there are, as Tim also said, there's so many mistakes in the cemetery. There are 3. Let's see, I just forgot the name of the guy, but the Michigan plot is horrible.
Really?
There's so many the duplicates of names. So many men's names are on the Michigan stones that didn't died years later.
Huh. So do we know? Or I guess we can't be confident that anywhere we see a name, that the guy with that name is right under that stone.
With most of them, I think you can be very confident. But you've got to check and do the research and find out. But,
right.
Yeah.
Who was the guy from? I think it was the 90th Pennsylvania.
You're talking about Stephen Kelly.
That's
91st Pennsylvania, Little Round Top. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Stephen Kelly. You talk about a guy that was organized. He had every part of his uniform stenciled with his name. His canteen, his knapsack, and his shirts.
Smart.
But on the march to Gettysburg, he got sick and he was taken to Baltimore to a hospital. And we don't know that if his knapsack and canteen was stolen from him, or one of his comrades just took him the safeguard. I actually had an account down in the archives that Stephen Kelly said they were stolen from him. So some soldier, we don't know who he was, probably of the 91st Pennsylvania, would be killed there on Little Round Top in that area. And because he supposedly had a canteen or the knapsack with Stephen Kelly's name stenciled on it, he is buried in the Pennsylvania section under the name Stephen Kelly.
Oh, wow.
And Tim, what was the first GAR encampment here at Gettysburg?
Well,
what year was that?
So, I have another source for you that I can give you. I know exactly what you're going to ask. Now we have this ability to go on newspapers.com, and I Googled Stephen Kelly's name, and there's an article in 1883 during the dedication of the 91st Pennsylvania Monument. Stephen Kelly comes to Gettysburg. And he and his comrades are laying flowers on the soldiers in the 91st in the National Cemetery. And one of his comrades calls him over and says, hey, you got to see this. And so apparently, according to this, it was in July of 1883 when he realized his name was there, according to this article.
Yep. Yeah, I read that article too.
Excellent.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, he sees his own name on this tombstone. And for years after that, he kept trying to convince the Cemetery Association here and the federal government, because he wanted to get a pension, that he wasn't dead.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't believe him. And so for year after year, he would come to Gettysburg. He would lay flowers on his grave, as he said. And he also asked that when he did die, he wanted to be buried in his grave here at Gettysburg, but they wouldn't let him. So, yeah, Stephen Kelly is an interesting guy. He's from Philadelphia. He died, I don't have the date he died. I think 1890s, or late 1880s. Died in Philadelphia. By that time, he was, quote, quote, a hermit. His house was falling down. He was I guess, what do we call those people today? The
hoarder.
A hoarder?
Yeah. That's basically what he was.
That's, can you imagine seeing your own grave? That's
He's
very
buried
Back
today
to the
in
Future
the
3.
Philadelphia National Cemetery.
One more thing before we leave this Southerners in
Sure,
the
Bobby.
National Cemetery. Late 1990s, I was guiding. You guys were all guiding. 96 or 97, I can't remember, when all the excitement about the railroad cut find.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that body was buried in our cemetery. A Confederate?
1996 was when they found the body.
Okay, yeah. Was that a Confederate?
They found a cuff button and part of a shoe.
Yeah, I read the archaeology report not too long ago, and because everybody asked this question: did they ever identify the Confederate, or is he a Southerner? And what the archaeological report stated was that there was a part of a shoe that looked like it was the type of shoe manufactured by a North Carolina company during the Civil War.
Okay. How about other conjectural evidence?
There was a bullet near the body.
Okay.
But the archaeologists couldn't say whether that bullet had fallen out of the body that deteriorated, or that bullet happened to be laying in the ground below the body.
Correct. But did the report say that this was clearly a Civil War soldier?
No, it could be a hobo in the 1870s who got hit by the train.
Oh, I was under the impression that they had established that it was a Civil War soldier.
It was very, we had all kinds of people that said, oh, it must be this or it must be that.
Okay.
But in the end, when you read the archaeological report, which you can buy, it was printed in a booklet. I don't remember the name of it, but they used to sell it at the bookstore, so you can find it on the internet, I'm sure. It was very inconclusive.
Okay. If it was a soldier from the Battle of Gettysburg, would it make sense that it would be a Confederate? They buried their own dead. They didn't leave a record of where, and that's why it took so long to unsurface?
Maybe, maybe not.
Okay.
Where exactly was it found? Was it in the wall of the cut?
It was found on the wall of the cut about, if I remember correctly, like 20 feet from the right flank marker of the 6th Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Wasn't
that's
it near
my memory
Or
of
the
it, too.
95th New York, right?
Yeah, 95th New York.
But it was on
flank,
the south
95th
side of
New
the
York.
railroad.
Okay.
On the south side of the railroad
Which
cut.
at that point the wall is pretty low.
It is pretty low.
Yeah. So okay. Interesting. I see. I'm surprised to find out that we're not completely certain that was a soldier.
But I'm gonna say that it's probably a Southern Civil War soldier. If Bob's point is that they purposely buried a Southerner in the National Cemetery when they specifically weren't burying Southern soldiers in it, I think that's true. But Roy, let me hit you with something that I think is fascinating, and that's that. Okay, So we have the story, for instance, about Stephen Kelly. And then later, they scratch Stephen Kelly's name out and they recarve in the scratch out unknown. Now, we know where he's buried because the cemetery published a list of every person buried in the cemetery, of the names on every stone in like 1865, and that's been printed. And so you can walk around with this booklet that was printed in the 1860s. It's been reprinted several times, and you can actually go from grave to grave to grave and see what the graves used to say. And so we can go to Pennsylvania, row A, grave 12, off the top of my head. And you can see Stephen Kelly, Company E, 91st Pennsylvania, in that book. Is that right? I don't even know what row it is.
Yeah, it's row A, but it's farther down, right? But.
So, are there only males buried in the National Cemetery?
No.
Oh, scandalous.
There are 4 women buried in the Pennsylvania plot. Row G. They are wives of Civil War veterans, and their husbands died years after the Civil War. Because, okay, if you're a veteran of the Civil War, you can be buried in the National Cemetery. Doesn't matter if you fought at Gettysburg or not. So these 4 men, when they passed away, they were veterans of the war. They were buried in the Pennsylvania section, and their wives are buried with them. So there's 4 of them.
So when people,
on top of each other?
Probably not, because if you look at row G, there's a lot of gaps. They're not just one right after another.
Okay.
So I don't think the wives are buried on top of the husbands.
Oh, okay.
That's just not right.
All right.
We have a lady here with our group, and she is agreeing with me 100%. Yeah.
If you are at the National Cemetery in the semicircular part, and you're looking at a particular name, okay, are you actually standing above the person that was buried there? And is their head pointing to the Soldiers' National Monument, the Genius of Liberty, or are their feet pointed that way?
Their head is pointing to the National Soldiers' Monument. So if they would sit up at Resurrection Day, they're looking out over the battlefield.
But that was not intentional.
So it is a headstone.
Okay.
So you're standing, you're looking down at the name, the person's right in front of you, the head is there at the stone.
Oh, so where you're standing is not where the person on the stone, where the name is. Like, so in other words, Tom Smith, I'm looking at Tom Smith, he's not below my feet, he's on the other side of the stone.
Correct.
Okay.
And you know what's really interesting about that, Roy? That's true. They're on the outside, in other words, of the Soldiers' National Monument from where the inscription of their name is. And when the Park Service they put the road, I shouldn't say the Park Service, when the War Department cut the road through the cemetery, in the last row, especially in the New York section, they cut really close to the graves. And then they kind of contoured the ground off. And I always wonder in some of these graves if they cut into the grave a little bit, depending on how deep the coffin is, or the grave. Now, when I mention this, because in the early days of guiding, and I should say, Roy, that I did not start guiding until the cemetery is off limits to cars and buses. But as a tourist, I came here often, and buses would pull into the National Cemetery, and the buses would pull off the road and pull right onto the graves, right on top of the graves. And I remember one time I was walking through the cemetery, and a maintenance man was driving a stake into a grave on the side of the road that said no parking on grass. And I was like, and I'd been on Roy's tours, so I was familiar with the way the soldiers were buried. And I was like, man, you're driving that post right through somebody's body. And I don't think people realized this, what Roy's saying. They didn't realize this. And that's the reason the road's so close to the edge of the graves.
That's crazy.
How deep were the bodies?
3 feet down. Now, they have added topsoil to it. The stones originally were 18 inches higher above the ground. So the guy is buried 3 feet down. That's the bottom of the casket. But the headstone will be 18 inches higher. But now all the topsoil has been put in so you can mow. All the stones, therefore, are flush with the ground. So you got, 3 feet, 18 inches.
So the stones weren't originally flat like they are today.
No. Well, they were
Interesting.
not flush with the
flush,
ground.
yeah,
They're still
yeah.
flat, but they had to be flush.
Right. Okay. Huh. That is
One
some
more
pretty
thing about
fascinating
this before
stuff.
before we go on, those 979 stones, are they really unknown?
Not all of them. For my research, I've been able to identify at least 6 of those unknown soldiers. And the reason why, when Samuel Weaver, who was in charge of the disinterment of the bodies, he kept a very detailed ledger of every single body he disinterred. He made sure that every body that was dug up, he was there. And he would rummage through the pockets of the soldier and try to identify who he was with a letter or stencil with a shirt or something. He had long probes that he could go into the pockets. So Samuel Weaver kept a detailed account of every single soldier and what was on the soldier's body. Now, where was I going with that?
Unidentified that have names.
Oh, yes, right. Okay. So what he also did, all the soldiers had to be buried in the state plots. Well, there was a few soldiers that he knew their name, what was written on the headboard, but he didn't know what state they were from. So he couldn't bury them in a state plot because he doesn't know what state, but he does still know the person's name. So in his ledger, he would write down the person's name, but give it a number as an unknown soldier. But even though he still knew who it was. So you take that, and yes, you take his numbers, and you can go over there to those stones and say, okay, grave 255.
And is this a real example?
Is John Morrison.
Okay.
Yeah, from Massachusetts. So what I did again, I took those numbers, took those names, went over and tried to identify who they were. There's one of the unknown soldiers, though, that I had a mess with. Because in Weaver's notation, it said Isaac Cavalry. I couldn't find anybody by the last name of Cavalry.
He was in the cavalry?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden the light bulb came on in my head. Oh, doggone it, he's a cavalryman. That's it. So I looked through the cavalry. There's only one Isaac that was killed in the battle who was in the cavalry, and that was Isaac Vivette.
Interesting.
But yeah, there's about 6 of the unknowns.
So even
I've
back
been able
then,
to do.
people couldn't spell cavalry.
Right.
And
Okay, I
back to
thought
our
that was
host,
just a
Matt
new thing.
Cavalry. I mean, Calorie.
Cavalry.
And since there's not many killed cavalrymen in the battle, it's easy to find.
You never see those dead cavalrymen. Thank you, Roy. You just wanted some of that background information out
Let
there,
me
which
tell
I
a
find
story that
fascinating.
Roy probably is, from my point of view. Roy and I had been, I was fortunate enough to go to the National Archives with him in the early 90s a few times when he was working on his cemetery book. And he had this dream. And it was that Samuel Weaver stated that each one of these soldiers with the numbers, that he saved the stuff he found on the body. Like there would be a photograph of a little girl or a photograph of a wife, and he would put it in a box. And apparently these boxes for the 979 unknown were kept at the cemetery gatehouse or something like that. So when people came, they could rummage through and try to identify people. And Roy believed that those boxes with those items still exist and was trying to find them. Is that crazy, or is that a...
No, and I know exactly where all those boxes. I think there was 80 some boxes that Weaver packed up of combs, toothbrushes, coins, money, letters, photographs, all kinds of stuff. I think there's 80 some boxes that he had. Oh, I know exactly where they are.
Where?
Remember the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark? And the last scene, you have them pushing the box with the ark through this warehouse with a... That's where they are. No, we have no idea where those boxes are. They have just vanished. And yeah, Kathy George Harrison again. She spent so much time down in Washington trying to find out where those articles went. Never found out.
Huh.
So they were either stolen or, they're in a warehouse somewhere.
So here's a question that I hear people ask a lot. And why are some soldiers unknown? What were the reasons that they would go in the unknown plot or section? Now, you just gave us one, but what were some other reasons? I mean, the answer I usually give is pretty basic, decay and stuff like that. But
I would go along with that. Bodies laid out in the field for days, especially the first day dead, and you just, he doesn't have any identification on his body. They might know he's a New Yorker because of the buttons or his uniform.
Here, I have a specific, easy answer that I've found, and going through the lists of the people who are buried in the cemetery and looking at the known people, it appears as if you were killed in action, you're probably in an unknown grave. If you were wounded and die a few days later, somebody will write your name down. And the majority of the people who are known are the ones that died in hospitals after the battle, and the majority of the unknown, I suspect, because we don't have the unknown date of death, are men who were killed in battle. That's my take on it.
Oh, that's a good one. All right, let's move on here. Steve from Delaware says, in a strange and blighted land, Coco mentions that Wills had a collection of nearly 300 packages of valuables and personal items. Oh, we just did this, didn't we? Oh, that's all right. You answered that. Well, that was Steve from Delaware who asked that question, and it was answered already. All right. Civil_war_nerd asks, what is the name of the poem on the plaques around the cemetery?
Bivouac of the Dead.
Yeah, the poem is Bivouac of the Dead, written by Timothy O'Hara. And he wrote it at the time of the Mexican War in commemoration of American dead in the Battle of Villa Vista? Okay. My Spanish is not good. Yeah. It's a long, long poem. And in most national cemeteries, you will see stanzas of that poem, Bivouac of the Dead.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, I should mention it. We all have things that happen to us on tours that were totally unexpected, that just, blow our minds. But one day I was telling the story of the Bivouac of the Dead while I was standing in front of one of the plaques on the battlefield, and I had on my tour the high school band. And after I got done telling the story, this kid raised his hand and said, Mr. Smith, do you know if you sing the Bivouac of the Dead to the theme of Gilligan's Island, it has the same cadence?
No.
Do you want to try it?
Do it.
Roy's got it.
Roy's got it.
I think I know one of them.
A 3-hour poem.
Do the on fame's immortal camping grounds.
Oh, God, it works.
Their silent tents are spread.
Okay, we'll have to do this together, Tim.
It's a solo, Roy.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
That's the first verse, and that's the only reason I know it.
Wait a minute. We have to do this as a duet.
Okay. We're not very good singers.
No, we're not.
Okay. On fame's eternal camping ground, their silent tents are spread, and glory guards with solemn round.
Bivouac
you have to drag that out.
Man, it works.
The Bivouac of the Dead. It does work.
That's awesome.
I'm sure it works for a lot of other poems and songs, too. But that's the kind of thing you get from 8th graders who are not really paying attention to your tour.
I don't want to edit it out for the sake of the beautiful voices of Tim. It's just the lasting memory now. I have to suffer every time. Just yesterday, I was walking with a friend. We were looking at the Bivouac of the Dead and looking at Stephen Kelly's grave, and oh my! Now I can't get that out of my mind.
A high school kid brought that to your attention? So was he just like, did he have the Gilligan's Island theme song in his head as you're like walking around and he's noticing it? Like, how did he, do you know?
Yeah, doesn't everybody have the theme song of Gilligan's Island in your head playing continuously? Because
I do. On a lot of our Gettysburg tours, which last 3 hours, I often have people sing that.
It's a 3-hour tour. Yeah, good point. All right. Okay. finally, we'll close with these 3 questions from the hiking historian. She wants to know, the first question she's got is, what methods were used to try and identify the soldiers? Second one is, were any identified soldiers removed from the cemetery by their family to be reinterred in their hometown? And finally, do we know what unit has the most soldiers buried in the cemetery that could be identified?
What was the first one?
So the first one, what methods were used to try to identify the soldiers? We kind of covered this a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Samuel Weaver would look for letters, diaries, Bibles, stencils,
Photographs,
anything on the body that could. But keep in mind, a lot of them, again, had the wooden headboards. That were
There were no military issue ID dog tags like we would have later in wars. But there were some men, I think, who did purposely purchase things like that to help identify just in case.
Did they also flatten a bullet and scratch their initials or name into it too? I thought I saw a picture of...
Don't know about that. My great-grandfather's musket, which I have on my mantle, has his initials in it and his regiment number.
Right.
So I know at least in that one case they did that.
I have a breastplate, and the guy scratched his name and division in the back of that.
Okay.
But I don't know. How there probably had to be like 200 men with the last name of Martin in the 3rd Division.
And sometimes I think men would write their names on pieces of paper, wouldn't they? And
pin
put
it to
them, fix them to their uniform.
All right, so then the second one is, were any identified soldiers removed by their families and reinterred in their hometowns?
Correct. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay.
Major Noah Ferry, who's in the 5th Michigan Cavalry, he was initially buried in the Michigan plot, row I. His body was removed, taken to his home. So, there's quite a few of them. Lieutenant Wesley Miller, who's a U.S. regular, 7th U.S. Infantry, his body was taken up to Harrisburg. So, there's quite a few of them that years later or months later, the bodies were disinterred and families claimed them.
And then again, there's also a large number, I don't think anyone could know, of men who died at this battle who would have been buried somewhere, but not in the National Cemetery necessarily, whose families, especially if they were local, they would make the trip here and they'd get the body and they'd take them back home to bury them.
Now, and this is something I meant to ask you before. So, people that go to the National Cemetery and look at the half circle section and assume that those are all Gettysburg dead, we've established, are incorrect. There's Civil War dead, mostly Gettysburg dead. Mostly. But not all.
Let's throw a number out there. How many Civil War burials are there in this National Cemetery?
39.
3,500?
Yeah,
I used to say 3,555.
12 was the initial number of Gettysburg dead.
Okay.
But, of course, then there's more added to it.
Should
what
we
was
mention?
The number you just said? 3,000.
512.
I don't want to hold anyone to it. In my mind, and Roy is like the gospel to me when it comes to this because I read his book. In my mind, it stuck with 3,555 Civil War burial, but it's in the right ballpark. You were saying about this.
It probably depends on how you qualify the question, like how many people are buried in the inner circle, how many people buried in inner circle are Civil War dead, things like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Guys, I can help you with this here. A little book by a guy named Charles Teague. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there's a man named Timothy H. Smith who's acknowledged in the back of this book too. But burials in the National Cemetery, 3,512 Union dead initially buried, 9 misidentified Confederates, 979 unidentified dead, 3,706 total Civil War dead, 7,000 total interments, 3,320 Confederate dead exhumed from field graves in early 1870s, 2,935 taken to Hollywood Cemetery, Richmond.
Very good. Before we leave, a couple more things, if it's okay, that just like to hear from Roy and from Tim.
Of course, Bobby.
And I don't think we've really talked about it yet. The Southern dead. How long are they staying here? Are there any still out there? And then, if we could, a little bit about the Evergreen Cemetery, because if I'm not mistaken, there's 91 or so buried there as well.
Before we get to that, though, we have the third question, though.
Sorry.
That's okay. The hiking historian. It's do we know what unit has the most soldiers buried in the cemetery?
Okay, well, let me take a poll here because I tabulated them up the other night, so I know the number.
Okay.
So can I guess?
So, go
I
ahead,
think I know.
Tim, guess.
1st Minnesota.
I was going to take that one, stinker.
52.
So Tim Smith wants 1st
There's
Minnesota.
52 bodies there.
And you want 1st
Minnesota
Minnesota too.
Okay,
Well, I
so
was going to say, if I can qualify it by percentage, I was going to say 1st Minnesota.
So let's hit
that's a very
another
small
state
regiment.
that has a lot of men killed that we suspect may be there, just so that we get another guess in, because he's going to tell us we're wrong. So 24th Michigan.
Oh,
that's a good
24th
one.
Michigan. Well, the 157th New York.
Excellent. 157th in New York has like a huge amount of dead in the first day. You know, it will all come down to how good your regimental burial crew was.
Yeah, and maybe how far away your state is, right? Because Pennsylvania units, their families will come and get them out of here.
Well, guess what? You guys are both right. 1st Minnesota. There's 34 identified Minnesota men buried in the Minnesota plot. There's a lot of unknowns there also.
Yeah.
But
No
1st
surprise.
Minnesota Regiment.
When you lose that much of your unit, there's not a lot of guys left to tell people who that was.
Right.
How about the urn in the Minnesota plot? What's the significance of that?
Yeah, the urn, in fact, that is the oldest memorial on the battlefield, other than a carving, a rock
Like in the
carving.
rocks, yeah.
Right. The 1st Minnesota urn was placed in 1867.
Oh, real? Oh, that long ago? Okay. Oh, neat.
When was the cornerstone of the Soldiers National Monument laid?
1865.
But just the cornerstone.
Just the cornerstone.
Right.
Correct.
And I know that it's not the same thing, but a lot of times people will ask, well, did Lincoln speak from that rostrum that you first see there? So what do you say about that?
No, because the rostrum
Steven
wasn't
Spielberg
built
did,
until
though.
1879. So Lincoln didn't speak from there, and he didn't speak at the National Soldiers Monument either.
Right. We do have a number of presidents who have
Yep.
spoken from that rostrum, though.
Quite a few presidents have spoken from the rostrum. Eisenhower, Theodore Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, I think when he was vice president. So quite a few.
Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover.
Yeah.
Roy, where do we believe that Lincoln was when the Gettysburg Address was delivered?
No, he's standing on the platform.
That's what exactly. That's your answer,
specifically.
folks. Yeah.
So he's not the only one that can crack a joke. Yeah, yeah. When I started guiding, Dr. Frederick Tilburg, who was chief historian, insisted that the platform where Lincoln spoke was where the National Soldiers Monument is located. And now through the research, myself and other individuals like Bill Frasinito and Kathy George Harrison, no, it was just on the other side of the iron fence, just inside the Evergreen Cemetery. In fact, the way the platform was aligned, it was actually not facing where the Soldiers National Monument is today. That's where the flagpole was. And we had always thought the platform faced toward the flagpole. But if you look at one of the sketches that was made at the time, the platform is angled. And so actually part of the platform, which is 20 feet by 12 feet, probably stuck out through where the iron fence is today. Probably the left side of the platform was sticking out diagonally where the iron fence is today, and the right side was in the Evergreen Cemetery.
So
Roy,
just on the other side.
Facing what? Like south
northeast?
Actually,
or?
facing toward us.
Yeah,
Facing toward us.
Actually, yeah, facing northwest.
Okay. So
Northwest.
northeast.
Yes, northeast.
Okay. So, is there a photograph taken from in there where we could see the gatehouse in the background? Is that how you figured it, or?
There's several photographs that were taken that showed the gatehouse. There's a photograph taken from the gatehouse looking back to where the platform is.
Oh.
There's another photograph taken close down to where the Illinois and Delaware, West Virginia plots looking up toward the platform. So there's several different photographs, plus Joseph Becker's sketch that he made for Leslie's Illustrated Weekly that shows some of the headstones in the Evergreen Cemetery. So you line them all up.
Right.
And also go with all the newspaper accounts. And yeah, it's got to be just inside the Evergreen Cemetery.
I don't know if it's still there, but on Steinway Avenue in front of the Quality Inn, I think there was a wayside marker that has that photograph of with Lincoln as he's sitting down, the blurry Lincoln. And I believe, I haven't looked at it in years, and I don't know if it's still there, but I believe it said that it is believed that photo was taken from roundabout where the marker is on Steinway Avenue. But that never made sense to me.
Oh, I think, Roy, he's talking about... No, I think you're talking about there is a photograph by a Hanover photographer. It's one of those weavers taken down near the Quality Inn on the Emmitsburg Road, looking across the Tawnytown Road and that's the one that's down on Steinway Avenue.
Oh, it's not the one of Lincoln sitting? Oh,
no,
is it the one with the little boy in the foreground?
No. This is a much more. It's much farther away, looking up at the cemetery.
I gotta go look at it again.
Sitting, isn't that the one on the wayside now?
Yeah, they have that wayside in the cemetery.
In the cemetery.
But this is on Steinway Avenue. Yeah. The one I'm talking about.
And did they position that one in the cemetery, the wayside, so that you would be looking over towards where Lincoln was supposedly standing?
It's positioned incorrectly.
Okay. So it should be angled even more towards the west then, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Just inside the fence, huh?
Yeah, the iron fence, which of course was not there at the time.
Right.
There's a gate.
By the way, it's not there now either. Did you see that? I was walking through the cemetery yesterday, and a large section of the Sickles fence is missing. They have barriers now. The park they're doing something. I don't know what. I was going to ask you guys if you know what.
I haven't been there.
So before you leave, just go over and take a look.
I'll have to do that. Yeah. But yeah, there's a gate, the iron gate. And basically, the platform is literally just on the other side of that gate.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned the Sickles fence, and I was going to ask you about that. The story of that iron fence that separates the private from the National Cemetery.
Originally,
why did he call it the Sickles fence?
Yeah, originally it was in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., and supposedly, it's the fence that beside where Daniel Sickles murdered Philip Barton Key in the love affair in 1859, before the war.
Okay.
Oh, Roy, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, because I noticed you don't keep up on the ghost tour stories, the latest ghost tour stories. But I heard a ghost tour guide standing near the Evergreen Cemetery, because, we don't want them coming in Evergreen Cemetery. But he was standing near the edge of the property, and he said that Sickles' ghost is often seen along the fence.
Of course,
because this fence was in Lafayette Park. And he said if you walk up the fence a short distance, you'll see where a bullet has grazed part of the fence with one of the shots that he missed Key with.
That's awesome.
That's
what we ought to all go on one of these tours.
I know. Oh, that'd be great.
You ought to do a live. You ought to do a live performance and have a whole bunch of guides like.
In that
Roy
case, you got to give the ghost tour credit for that is genius.
Yeah, that
to
is
suggest
genius.
that there's a bullet hole in the fence.
Yeah, then you got a whole bunch of idiots running up there looking for bullet holes,
and that's probably why the fence is missing. People are taking it now.
It's corroded from all the oil from our skin.
I believe too. It was Sickles as a legislator who initiated the legislation to remove that fence in the 1880s or something, 1888. I don't know when it was.
Remove it and have it put here.
And put here. Yeah. Both between the cemetery and that's a section of it around the copse of trees.
Well, where was it originally?
Lafayette Square. Or Lafayette Park.
Lafayette Park.
Yeah, Gettysburg.
Oh, yeah, but originally they did have the fence came across the top of Cemetery Hill all the way down to the McKnight House and all the way along the avenue down there, so it's pretty expansive. They had a much larger section of the fence on the East Cemetery Hill side of the Baltimore Pike all the way down.
Oh, yeah. I didn't know that. Good, good.
And then in the 1930s, they shifted it over to separate the Evergreen and the National.
Yeah, for a while there was just a hedge between the Evergreen Cemetery and the National Cemetery.
Wow, that's cool.
How about tell us about the Hancock Gate and why did it appear a few years ago?
Well, Bob's referring to the fence on the other side of the National Cemetery on the Tonytown Road side. And just recently they put back a fence that actually led to the original Hancock Avenue. That's why we call it Hancock, because it's Hancock Avenue. So prior to the cyclorama being built and prior to the road being extended down to the Emmitsburg Road to get onto Hancock Avenue, going by the angle, you come up the Tonytown Road and across from the National Cemetery and slightly down the hill a little bit south of it, you made a right onto Hancock Avenue to get into the battlefield. And this is where we're talking about the old Cyclorama parking lot. And it was a gate you went through. And at first, we're looking at the GBMA photographs, it's a wooden gate. And then they put in a more formal metal gate. And then I believe in the 1920s they put in this stone gate. And apparently when the park had removed this gate at some point, I don't know when it was removed, the park had it in storage. And when they were working on the Cyclorama parking lot and the tearing down of the old visitor center and the restoration of Cemetery Hill, somebody pointed out that, hey, we still have all the parts left from this original gate. Not original, but one of the gates that led on to Hancock Avenue. So the park decided to put it back. Now, it's been controversial over the years with different tour guides and historians, because I thought we were trying to restore the battlefield to the way it appeared at the time of the battle. And what are we doing restoring a 1920s gate? I don't understand at all. But it was there, they had it, and they put it back out. So that's why it's there.
And oftentimes I see people trying to turn into it. Have you seen that? Not often. Okay, once or twice I've seen it.
Yeah. So, I guess it was a function of we had all the pieces of it and it was in storage and they put it back out.
So it was originally at the end of Hancock Avenue, which would have been the beginning?
Which would be the entrance to the Gettysburg National Military Park.
Because originally the traffic pattern went
originally
opposite.
You turned into that gate and then it went up and then around what is now the Cyclorama parking lot down Hancock Avenue and Ziggers Grove.
And that was about when the 30s, when it was that way?
Well, in the 1880s, that was the entrance. And then, they kept redoing the entrance. And like I said, that thing that they put back up is not the original entrance gate. It's like the third.
Right. The last one?
Yeah.
When very few veterans would have ever seen it. I mean, that's 1920s. That's so late.
Yeah,
if you wanted to restore this place the way it looked in the 1880s, when a veteran would recognize it, that gate wouldn't have been recognized.
Yeah, I don't even know when this gate. I could be wrong, but today it might be a little earlier.
Okay,
I think it was 1926.
Okay.
And I was, again, walking through yesterday, and I noticed they're replacing those cannonball piles by, I guess it's Taft's Battery and Dilger's Battery there near the restrooms. There's two nice, shiny, black-painted piles of cannonballs. Is that a decision that they're going to do that all over the battlefield now again?
I don't think they're going to do it all over the battlefield, because if they do that, they're going to run into the same problem why they took them off in the first place.
Why did they take them off in the first place?
People were stealing them.
Oh. How are they that easy to steal? They're
Good
not
old
bolted
sledgehammer.
down?
Yeah. So there was a lot of them that were being hit and broken and being stolen. So the Park Service made just a thought, take them off. But now I think they're putting them around randomly. I don't see every one of them being put back again.
So maybe the cemetery, and it'd be nice if you could see one over by the angle, perhaps.
Yeah.
Since got the production.
Like Cushing's Battery. That would be cool if they completed the look.
Yeah. How about the Southern dead?
Oh yeah, your question.
Well, the Confederate dead are basically left on the field in mass graves for about 7 years, and then Rufus Weaver is going to be contacted by Southern ladies' societies that want their dead returned back home. So he will start an effort to disinter the Confederate dead and have them boxed up, because at that time they're all unknown. I would say the boxes probably contained bones, rocks, dirt, and everything, and shipped them to to Richmond, Virginia. And most of them are going to be taken to Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and Raleigh, North Carolina. So those are the 4 places where most of the Confederate dead then are taken south. But that's years after the war.
And do you ever have someone on a tour say, that's not right? Why couldn't they bury the Southern dead here, too? And
Sure.
I've actually never had anybody say that.
Oh, I have.
Yeah, I mean, people say that a lot, and I think it is difficult to answer that question. I mean, I think the people that are the victims of this dispute as to whether they should remove the Southern bodies or not are the local townspeople. I mean, for years and years after the battle, farmers have dead bodies all over their fields. And here's something that's interesting. I'm definitely not a Southerner. I definitely don't have like Southern tendencies or Southern sympathies. And I've actually been accused of being pretty harsh on the Southerners, more harsh than I should be on my tours. I want to qualify that. But, sure, it's a natural inclination to feel bad about what happened to the Southern dead after the battle was over. The townspeople would like the Southerners removed from their fields. And here's something, and I say this not trying to be anti-government, but the federal government stepped in after the battle and arrested townspeople for picking up stuff off of their personal property, like guns and swords and bullets and artillery shells. Apparently, the bullets that were fired by the soldiers and the guns that were left on the battlefield on your property are government property, not your property. And so these people are arrested for stealing government property by picking stuff off of their property that's dropped there. But you know what the federal government doesn't claim? They don't have any responsibility for the dead Confederate soldiers they killed and put on your property. That's not their problem.
Right.
Obviously, I'm just teasing a little bit, but
Right.
It is a serious problem for the farmers, and they would like someone to come to Gettysburg and recover these dead so they can farm their fields again without, having to plow up bodies. And let's talk about just the time from the battle until the Confederates are moved. Do you think the farmers did not plow their fields?
Right.
And then when they did plow their fields, and then afterwards they come back to find the bodies, are the Southern organizations for recovering bodies going to find all the bodies after years of plowing?
Yeah.
I mean, Kathy George, Roy mentioned Kathy George earlier, who was a park historian here for many, many years and did a lot of valuable work on different park projects. She was very controversial about this in some of the first meetings I ever attended as a guide. Usually people would downplay the idea that maybe Southerners still buried here. Well, maybe they missed a few, or maybe there is a couple here and there, but they would make it sound like it was an isolated, situation. She would come out in these park lectures and she would say, okay, this is the number of soldiers that were moved to cemeteries that we know of. This is the number of Confederate soldiers we think were killed during the battle. There's a difference of about 1,000. And those people many of them must still be buried on the battlefield. And she would present it as if there's hundreds, if not 1,000 Southerners still buried on the battlefield. And I always appreciated that she did that. Maybe she was one extreme. Maybe that's an extreme example. But I appreciated that she did that and that she was always trying to make a point that, hey, it's a lot more people still buried here on the battlefield, and probably Union soldiers too, than people are willing to talk about or think about.
So what do you think? Do you think there are still some soldiers? Because people ask this one all the time too.
I don't think there is. I know that there's a lot of soldiers still buried here. It just depends upon your definition of a lot. There are a couple hundred, maybe more. But again, it's a function of us. It's made more difficult by the fact that we don't know how many men were killed at the battle, and we don't have exact records of who died in the battle and then who died in a hospital afterwards. And, also soldiers were taken to Harrisburg and died, and Philadelphia and Baltimore and, all over the place. So it's difficult because our numbers aren't exact.
Okay. You agree?
Yeah, I agree that there probably are Confederates still buried on the battlefield, and probably some Union soldiers that would never be found. Very good possibility.
Yeah.
But we definitely know that there's not a mass grave underneath the tree beside the coffee shop.
Very good.
Or maybe we don't know.
Oh.
Right. Well, we'll have to just take that ghost tour and find out for ourselves. Robert?
Just one more quick thing, I think.
Yeah.
Because I did ask about the Evergreen Cemetery as well, and it occurs to me we ought to have these gentlemen and Deb Novotny here too.
Sure.
Sometime for one of these
Of
to maybe
course.
focus in on the
I've got her
Evergreen
card on
Cemetery.
my desk.
All right.
I'll send her an
awesome.
email.
That would be a great one. So I was walking around there yesterday too, and of course going all over the place trying to pick out my grave maybe. But I was by the Civil War section, and I was explaining to my friend that, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but that these would be people whose loved ones had come and had paid the Evergreen Cemetery to have their loved ones interred there. I'm right so far? So what surprised me was I found one unknown. Do you know why? I mean, was this gratis or what?
Well, it would have to be.
I was just going to say, perhaps someone found that one unknown soldier, or that one unknown soldier was in their yard, and they wanted that soldier removed. Someone, let me just tell you this. We have burial permits. Someone has to pay the $2 permit fee for a soldier to be buried in there.
Okay.
Elizabeth Thorne was burying
I was gonna
soldiers in the
say.
cemetery, but she wasn't just randomly going around and picking up soldiers and burying them.
Right.
They were soldiers who someone paid the burial permit fee for them to be buried there.
So
Okay.
those are the soldiers she buried.
So, and I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but about 90 soldiers are buried in our cemetery initially. About 30 of them were later removed and then reburied in the National Cemetery when the National Cemetery was established.
Okay.
Right. And I've always wondered, did McConaughey give back the $2?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Sure he
right.
didn't.
I was
We
just
probably charged him another $2 to excavate them and remove them.
I was theorizing with my friend, perhaps someone who had their own son interred there maybe had this unknown body that was next to him. I mean, $2 if you're a wealthy New Yorker who's doing this, maybe they just said, hey, can you bury this one too? I don't know. But
Well, there are two brothers buried side by side in that Civil War section in the
Greenlee.
Evergreen. Yeah, Greenlee. One is killed here at Gettysburg, and then his other brother is killed at
Hall's Shop.
Hall Shop.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
In 64, right.
Yep.
Hanover County.
Roy, Bob mentioned you have a book. What's the name of your book?
It has a very catchy title. Gettysburg National Cemetery.
Wow, where'd you come up with that one?
I know, but it's out of print.
Ow.
But I am in the process of revising it, actually tripling the size of it,
Oh, nice.
and hopefully next year it'll be out.
Okay, so people might be able to find it used, but right now, like, they can't get it on Amazon or anything like
Nope,
that.
no.
Okay, so we just got to look for the new edition next
Hopefully
year,
it'll
maybe.
be coming out, right.
All right, well, let us know so that we could let the audience know. This was great. This was very fascinating. I love this one. Now I want to go over to the cemetery. So thanks for doing this, Roy.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you, Tim, as always. Bob, as always. Peggy, thanks for coming and watching. And Eric, thank you. And everybody in the audience, as always, if you want to take a tour with any of these guides, just shoot me an email. Of course, now, during the quarantine, you can't quite do that. But hopefully, if you listen to this after the quarantine is lifted and things go back to normal, we can do that. And I'll get you in touch with them if you want to do that. Otherwise, thank you all. Hope you're doing well, and take care.
Bye-bye.
Our hearts so stout have got us famed, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down